Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. This is Charles in Hong Kong, welcoming you to this week's HorizonX Network with my guest panelist, Damian Rhodes. And we're excited because this week we're talking about having a clear horizon ahead for you to design your dream 2026 and the next 30 days. And we will spend the next hour talking about different things that you can do to set yourself up for maximum success in the year ahead. What I would like to do is give Damien an opportunity to introduce himself here. Damien, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Charles, thanks for inviting me.
And how's everything going in the UK? How's the weather?
Very wet and cold at the moment, but it's 5 a.m. in the UK right now, so I don't blame it for being cold.
Okay. Well, we have perfect weather here in Hong Kong, although it's quite smoggy at the moment. We're in that November smoggy period.
Understood.
So, Damien, tell us a little bit about your background so people know a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. I've got a slightly unusual background. I went from being a monk to management consultant many years ago, then 24 years as a recruiter, mainly at the executive level, so director, acting level recruitment, and then starting 10 years ago. I became a certified executive coach and started coaching alongside recruiting.
Outstanding. And how's that going for you?
Yeah, it's going well. It's really interesting. So I'm coaching at the moment individuals looking to change career, also business owners, and also leaders within organisations who are looking to expand and expand their teams. So it's going well.
Excellent. That's great. So before we get into this week's topic, I want to take a moment just to acknowledge what's happened in Hong Kong in the last week. And it actually happened 8 days ago, it started, but right now Hong Kong is living through the aftermath of the Tai Po fires, which has claimed the lives of 156 people and has left over 4,000 people homeless, while hundreds have been injured, and it's been a really devastating situation. So we just take a moment of silence to acknowledge that while we get excited for the anticipation of 2026, we recognize that Hong Kong is very much grieving, and a lot of people deeply, deeply affected, thousands and thousands of people, if not directly affected, they know people affected from what happened a week ago. So we just take a moment to acknowledge that before we move on with our presentation. So moving forward then, let me try to arrange our windows here so people can see us. And if you are here, tell us from where you are joining us from. And let me just drop that into the comments here. And so people can do that. So what we're talking about today is getting ready for 2026. And we have a bit of a slide presentation here for us to go through. And what a lot of people do is we find that people will be in one of four camps when they are coming to the end of a year. So there will be people, so these are common mistakes that people make in December. So option one, people will be hyper focused on closing the quarter because they may have numbers to achieve for the end of the quarter and they're accountable, especially if they're a publicly traded company. I'm sure you're familiar with that, right, Damien?
Yes, absolutely.
And then there are those. Yes, sorry.
So a lot of pressure in the last quarter, definitely.
Yeah, a lot of pressure. And it goes quarter by quarter and then a ton at the end of the fiscal year. Assuming that the end of December is the end of your fiscal year. That's not always the case. Lots of companies have a different fiscal year. Then option two, people give up and coast until the new year. So they might think, well, I haven't achieved these goals, so I'm going to just take it easy because it's the end of the year, approaching the holidays. And option three is wait for January 1st to start fresh. which is a little bit like option two, coasting until the new year.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then option four, there is a group, a healthy fourth group that celebrates their success. They may have knocked their goals out of the park, and that's what they're focusing on over the course of the holidays. So congratulations to those group. But a lot of people find themselves in options one, two, three, and they tend to move from one time period to another. And the other thing is, a lot of people will say, "What's the difference moving from 2025 to 2026?" That's just a man-made calendar shift. And what's your view on that, Damien? The man-made calendar shift, that it's just all made up.
Well, I think to some extent, anything that reminds us to start again and to review and renew, I think is a good thing. No, I tell my children, every day is a brand new day. You're trying to start anew, fresh. But I think what's very interesting about the common mistakes here is when I was half my time as a recruiter in Hong Kong, and people would often say no one recruits in December, and no one recruits for Chinese New Year. So you'd often get about 6 or 7 weeks where people in professional owners weren't really working very hard for a significant amount of time because they expected nothing to happen. And I found that actually acting as if people are going to recruit did work. And I found some of the most interesting work I did was in December and January. When other people think that you couldn't do business, you actually can. So I think it is interesting.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So that's an opportunity when a lot of people ease off the gas pedal or the accelerator, and that's when you can actually step down on it and accelerate forward.
Absolutely.
So that's a little bit about what we're talking about here. So let's move on then to our next slide here, and that is Quitter's Day. Have you heard of Quitter's Day?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, so other people may not have heard of Quitter's Day. But Quitter's Day started with Strava, the fitness app, which is huge. They're like the size of LinkedIn. And what they discovered was that there was a certain day each year when people gave up on their fitness goals. On top, once Strava did this, other apps were also paying attention to their own apps that were goal setting oriented or project oriented. Were paying attention to their own data and said, wow, we're seeing the same phenomenon, that there's a time every year when people are giving up on their goals. So the predicted day for people to give up on their New Year's resolutions is Friday, January 9th, 2026. So one of the things you want to do is be very much aware of things that you can do to avoid Quitter's Day. And why do people fail on their New Year's resolutions? And a significant portion do. A lot of it's lack of planning, not turning daily goals into habit, or not turning goals into daily habits, setting unrealistic goals, or getting into overwhelm when they do set goals, and also not being able to overcome setbacks. And so one of the solutions is to start now on foundational work, a little bit like what you were talking about, taking advantage of that gap, Damien, in the December-January timeframe. In this case, we're talking about December, but when you wrap in Chinese New Year, you've also got January. To taking advantage of that time to create some foundational work in order to set yourself up for success. Anything you want to add to Quitter's Day, Damien?
I'm just surprised it's that late. I think
Yes.
about January still.
Yes, and some people set New Year's. Yeah, some people set New Year's resolutions, and that's it. They're all done.
Yes, so once they fail to do it one day, they give up the rest of the year. I'm a big fan of the writing of James Clear in Atomic Habits, where he talks about successful methodical daily habits, not necessarily so much the lifetime transformations, but putting systems in place to improve on a daily basis, and that's compound interest of making small changes that you stick to and that are sustainable.
Absolutely. And a lot of people read Atomic Habits and read Tim Ferriss's 4-Day Work Week and have a major transformation in their life. And that's the impetus for change. So actually, I planned on reading both those books courtesy of Blinklist over the holidays. So we'll see what happens if I have a big change when I come back in January. Now, after our Quitter's Day slide here, I want to get into the Wheel of Life. So we're going to do a little bit of an experiment because the Wheel of Life is a good way to look at your life and how you can balance out different aspects of how you approach various things in your life. Have you done the or do you do it a lot, or have you done it in the past, Damien? Or use the
I've got
Wheel
a
of Life as
version
a
of
tool?
this. There's a version of the site I use in my coaching plans.
Okay, so let me just pull up here the Wheel of Life. We've got one online. We're going to share this live. There we go. So people can do this experiment online live, and I'm going to blow this up. There we go. I'm going to blow this up so it's easy to see that. So that's pretty balanced. Can you see that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so we're going to take the assessment live here. And this is something that people can go to wheeloflife.numi.com and they can do this for themselves. And Damien and I are going to come up with a hypothetical individual that might be a combination of the two of us. Well, yeah, there you go. And let's say, okay, start with health. So what you do is, how would you rate this area of your life? 10 being perfect, and where are you now compared to 10 being imperfect? So I would probably say, let's say for argument's sake, we'll say 7. So room for improvement. A few pounds that could be lost, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so then we move on to career. So one of the dangers in this is that people straight line themselves. So just for argument's sake, let's say it's the end of the year, maybe someone hasn't met their goals, but they're still doing okay in their job, so rate them as a 6. Does that sound okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you can come up with a number for love, Damien.
And it's interesting. So love can involve romantic relationship, family relationship, or friendship.
Yeah, it could be. It could be romantic love, could be agape love, friendship love. Absolutely.
I think for this hypothetical individual, we're going to go for 7.
Okay, we're going to go for 7. All right. And then we move on to spirituality. And given that you were a former monk, how about you rate the spirituality?
Yeah, it's interesting. So spirituality, I would say, that can mean different things to different people, can't it? But
Yes.
maybe for this hypothetical individual, we're saying 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Okay. Great stuff for spirituality there. All right. Now let's move on to move it up here a little bit. Family. So let's say we've got, well, I'll rate family. So I will say 6 out of 10. I'm away from my kids. I'm with Tess and here in Hong Kong, but I'm away from my kids. So maybe I'm missing family a little bit. But I'm anticipating that I'm going to go back for Christmas and close the gap. I'll rate it as a 6 out of 10. Next one is money. So this hypothetical individual, so a lot of people struggle with money. So why don't we rate this hypothetical individual low, say at a 4?
Okay.
Okay. And then the next category is fun. Okay, fun. So just hypothetically speaking, why don't we rate this person really low on fun, down at a 3?
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Or not good, not good to
Yeah, not good, but yeah, okay. Then we have friends. Okay, so you get to rate this individual on friends.
maybe 5.
5 on
They're not
friends.
having fun. Maybe they're not spending enough time with friends.
Okay. So a 5 on friends. And there we have the Wheel of Life right there. So this tells us, I'll just move this up a little bit so it's and down a bit so it's a little bit easier to see this. So there you go. You've got the Wheel of Life there. And the first question that a lot of people would ask is, would you be able to drive a car on this type of wheel? So across money, fun, and friends, the individual is flat, got a flat tire. On other areas, they're strong, but they've got a flat tire on money, fun, and friends for sure. How would you advise an individual that had this kind of wheel of life, Damien?
How would I advise them to?
Yeah.
I think it's about asking questions and understanding what's missing in their life. I think it's asking what those mean as well in terms of money, for example. One person can have very low rating for money simply because they can't afford their third home. Other people will be struggling to eat. So it could be different things for different people. So I think it would be understanding from them exactly what it means. So I would say a combination of celebrating the high ones and understanding the low ones. How about you, Charles? How would you coach somebody with this wheel of life?
Well, one question I would ask them is in the friends, fun, and money category, what would make the difference that would move those up? And, it just can't be something like more money. It would have to be something a little more tangible than that and more concrete. But the other thing is, if you look at this from a strengths-based perspective, a lot of people would say, well, some people would say if you focus too much on the low areas, you actually maybe compromise the high areas, and you also you're focusing on the weaknesses to a degree. So one question would be, okay, given that love is 7 and spirituality is 8, are there ways that you could have more fun in the love category? And then love might move up to an 8, and fun might move up to a 6 or a 7. Yeah, and similarly, I think with health, there are specific goals that people would have around health. But again, they could be looking at, okay, what would close the gap and move you from a 7 to an 8, 9, or 10 on health? What activities would be fun for you to do around health that would then pull up fun? And same with friends. What fun things could you do with friends that would pull up both groups? So not looking exclusively at the low areas, but looking at how they can be bundled together to come up with some strategies that has a combination approach.
I like that. So you don't overcomplicate things, do we?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So this is a great tool that people can use. They can go to, again, wheeloflife.numi.com, and they can do this themselves. One of the things that I do is I take a screenshot of my Wheel of Life and do it maybe once a year or every couple of years and watch to see how it inflates over time. So that's the Wheel of Life. Let's just take a moment here to look at any comments that are coming in from people. And great insights, Lakshmi. Yep, thanks, Lakshmi. So go check out the Wheel of Life, Lakshmi, and do it for yourself. Invite everyone to do that. We've got a number of people joining here from India and also from Sri Lanka. So welcome, Wasantha from Sri Lanka, and Atul, loyal attendee. Glad that it's helpful discussion, Atul. Wonderful that you're with us today. So let's move on and hope that the other aspects of our presentation are equally as useful. So the next issue we have is forgive yourself. So I know you have a few things to say about this, but let me just start off on this one, Damien, and that is if people had specific goals that they wanted to achieve in the past, specifically for 2025, and they haven't achieved them, they need to really forgive themselves for not achieving those goals. They need to let go of that because the machinery of how human beings are wired, if people go into 2026 setting goals, having not forgiven themselves or completed the fact that they didn't successfully achieve goals in 2025, then there's a risk that any goals they set for 2026 are compensating for some kind of deficit from
Mm.
2025 or even before. So it could have been that you set a goal for yourself. Maybe you wanted to level up a skill during the pandemic and you never did, kind of thing.
Mm.
And you've been beating yourself up ever since. So you need to complete all that stuff from the past, acknowledge it, let it go, forgive yourself, and start afresh. Because otherwise, what you're doing going forward is compensation for what you didn't do in the past, and that machinery is notoriously unsuccessful. That human being machinery is notoriously unsuccessful when people do things in compensation for something that they didn't get done in the past. What are your thoughts on that, Damien?
Well, I think it's really important that self-compassion. People often define themselves, don't they, by their failures. So people thinking, I failed to do this, therefore I'm a failure. But being able to have that mindset shift to, I didn't hit this specific goal, but I am still capable of growth. And look at look at what, I think first of all, that forgiveness, and also looking at what can they learn from this. Because there are two potential pitfalls. One would be to give up for the following year. Another one would be to have very low goals, or to have ridiculously high goals but unachievable. And it's finding those stretch goals, but also strategies to put into place, getting those insights and turn into actions that can take them closer to their goals for the year ahead.
Yeah, and I love what you've just said, particularly the last part, taking insights and turning them into actions. Because I think this is the opportunity in the holidays. Most people will be around friends, they'll be around family, they'll be in a more relaxed environment where the pressure comes off of their brain, so they're
Yes.
a little more relaxed. And this creates the conditions for people to have insights, like you say. And how can they then translate those insights into actions? So the opportunity in December, as the festive season approaches and people start to have dinners and parties, is to actually take some reflective time to reflect on your goals, reflect on your life, and you're going to be naturally in a situation where you're going to generate more insights out of that, and then take advantage of those insights and translate them into actions, exactly as you said, Damien. That's really, really key here. So this is something that people can do in December in anticipation for January arriving. I highly recommend that.
So speaking over the slight time delay on my end,
Okay, go
how
ahead.
would you advise someone to forgive themselves? Would
How
there
would I
be any
invite?
particular skills or mindfulness you would encourage them to get involved in?
Sorry, the question was how would I advise someone dot dot dot
How
dot
would you
dot.
advise someone on a practical basis to forgive themselves for failing to hit their goals?
Right. Well, the first thing is to acknowledge it. The first thing is to acknowledge it. So a lot of people won't acknowledge that they've actually not achieved a certain goal. So it's just actually sitting down and saying, okay, here's what I set out to do and I didn't do that. And that's awareness. A lot of people say that awareness is half the battle in life, regardless of what problem you're up against. Then after that, the next aspect of forgiveness would be what are they making it mean? Which comes back to what you were saying. A lot of people will link their identity to their goals and their accomplishments. And
Yeah.
it's true to a degree, we're defined by our goals and our accomplishments. But we are not our goals and accomplishments. Even if people didn't accomplish a specific goal, what they'll find it during the holiday season and the Thanksgiving season that we just came out of is that their family and friends still love them, they still like them, they just didn't accomplish a goal, and the family and friends will feel for them that they didn't accomplish the goal, but it doesn't change who they are to them, right? It
No.
doesn't make them less or more of a person that they didn't accomplish a goal. Now, obviously, in a professional context, if people really miss a goal, there's repercussions. But again, they want to be processing that and forgiving themselves.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that it's really de-linking it from the identity and get a coach. That's how I would advise them. if they're stuck and they can't forgive themselves, then get a coach that can help them work through that and figure out strategies for forgiving themselves. How would you advise someone?
Well, I think getting back to what you said about acknowledging, first of all, what one point to forgiveness is recognizing that something has not worked out as it should do. And
Yes.
that's in that terms, awareness is probably one of the most important things to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Awareness is key.
Some people I coach find that journaling can be very helpful in this.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. And the other thing is, I know that, I think the most effective form of journaling is journaling in writing with a book, like what I have here with a book. It's not Joanne's Game On, but I'm holding up another book. So this is a small blank book that I keep for just writing down goals. And I deliberately made it small so that as I'm out and about doing things, I can not have to worry about carrying around a big book. It's just a very small, simple book. And, I love, one of the things that works for me is envelopes. If I get an envelope in the mail, I will, open it up carefully, and then I love making lists on envelopes. So I'll often take an envelope and use that it's a form of recycling, I guess, but I don't know, it somehow speaks to me. I'm not exactly sure why. And then envelope folded in half will easily fit in this. And
Oh,
then
wow.
I have
Do
something
you then
that
transfer it into the notebook after?
Pardon me?
Do you then transfer it into the notebook after?
No, I don't. Well, yes, I will. I'll write. It'll then go into the notebook. Yeah, a daily, like a weekly to-do list, might end up in the. But what's really in the notebook is my thoughts, my insights, concrete things I don't want to let go of, and the envelope is more like kind of the daily, weekly to-do list, and I get them done, and then move on. But what I have been exploring lately is some of the online portals, which I looked at several years ago, like Trello and Notion, and was not really a big fan of them. But now I did go back and look at Notion, and it has got a very, if you want it to, it can have a very simple interface. So one of the things I've done recently in my own exercise of completing 2025 and anticipating 2026 is I've started coming up with a list of legacy goals. And these are goals that, like, no kidding, over the course of my lifetime, I want to make sure I get them done. And there's not a huge list at the moment of legacy goals, but there's maybe less than 10 really meaty legacy goals. And I'm starting to think to myself, because having moved out of corporate into my own coaching practice and consulting practice, I'm now thinking to myself, okay, how can I make decisions in accordance with those legacy goals? And including clutter, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. And I'm finding that that is giving me some freedom, because if it's like companies that have vision, mission, and strategy statements, and then a company comes along and says, "Hey, do you want to buy us?" And the tech company says, "Well, you're not really part of our mission. Great value, see the possibility in your technology, but you're not part of our mission, or you're not part of our go-to-market strategy, and we're going to make decisions based on vision, mission, values." So that's a little bit like what the exercise I'm going through now. Yeah. Let's move on to the next one. So this is kind of really big picture about forgiving yourself, setting goals, vision, mission, stuff like that. The next one here is about sleep. And let me blow this up here. So one of the things that people can do over the course of the holidays is consciously get more sleep. And as I've mentioned before on HorizonX and in other LinkedIn Lives that I've participated in, if people have followed them at all, is that humans have lost the battle on sleep. In other words, you can't say that you are going to be effective without sleep. You will be much more effective if you have more sleep. It really can change the entire tone of a day. And here are some examples of tips for better sleep. Set a consistent sleep schedule, exercise regularly, avoid caffeine and nicotine late in the day, or even altogether, avoid altogether. Limit your screen time. I like this list because it's not saying don't do it, it's saying avoid it. So avoid
Yes.
large meals late. I had a large Thanksgiving dinner celebration. Despite being Canadian, I did enjoy the American Thanksgiving last weekend and found that for several days I was just full and that it was affecting many aspects of my physical, I guess, well-being. I didn't really feel unwell. I just felt full. Like I needed to, eat a lot of fruit and salads to kind of download. The other thing that's helpful is to create a relaxing bedtime routine, make your room dark. I've got a couple of other tips, but what do you do for sleep?
I think looking at that list, there's certainly things I should be doing better. But one thing I'm quite strict about is aiming to go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time. So
Yeah,
I
I'm
have
not
a
I'm not
bedtime
good at
routine
that.
as well as
I'm not good at
wake.
that, and I need to get better at that.
Something I have is a Fitbit watch, which I set an alarm, and it wakes me up within a half an hour window, depending where I am in my sleep cycle. So mine is set for 5:30 a.m. normally, and it wakes up between 5 and 5:30, depending where I am in my sleep cycle. So it's quite good from that point of view.
Yeah, I
What's your
use
sleep? Sorry.
I use Sleep Cycle, which is very similar to the what you've just described. I use Sleep Cycle, and I've been using Sleep Cycle since January 2011. So I have actually, if you look at the graphs in Sleep Cycle, it's quite amazing to see how my sleep has gone up and down. And one of the things I've noticed is that sometimes some of the family holidays we've taken where I've done a lot of driving, my sleep cycle actually gets worse. So the point of this is that we want to what people we want to encourage people during the holidays. There's a real tendency to stay up later, binge watch Netflix, things like that. But what we do know from sleep science is that if you want to get more sleep, go to bed a little bit earlier instead of sleeping in late and having a lie-in. Maybe that's good for you. It's different strokes for different folks, but in general, if you go to bed an hour earlier, and get that extra hour of sleep and wake up when you normally would, like you say, at a routine time, that's going to generally be more effective for people. But the opportunity during the holidays is to take advantage of getting more sleep, and these are some ways to do. Another thing that I find really helpful is I keep a bottle of water, lemon water. I fill it up every night before I go to bed. I have a bottle of lemon water next to my bed, and if I get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom or I just wake up for whatever reason, loud noise outside, the dog's barking, I will take a drink of water, and my goal is that within half an hour of waking up, that entire bottle of water is consumed because the body gets dehydrated. And I also find if I drink cool water, it naturally lulls me back to sleep when I lay back down and my head hits the pillow. Do you have any unique strategies or tips like that?
In terms of sleeping,
Yes.
I think in terms of turning off screen time an hour before going to bed is a good one. I don't do it consistently enough though. But when I do sleep a lot better.
Okay. That's
I just
also
find it
an
very tempting to check emails before going to bed though, which is one of my guilty things I do at the moment where I need to stop doing that.
okay. Yeah, am not great about that's an area of improvement too. If that was on the wheel of life, I'd be scoring low on that. I don't check emails, but I do check in mails on LinkedIn, and I also will be checking the news, which is coming up in a couple of slides about information intake. But let's move on to the next one. So, in addition to sleep, here's a checklist around, blow this up for people to see here. This is a checklist around morning routines. So, after sleep, what are some things that people can do around the morning routine? So, the left side uh, some of the items on the left side are about going to bed earlier, creating a dark environment that's quiet when you go to bed. And I guess you could look at some of these things. So, for example, on the right-hand side, it says review your schedule. Some people say review your schedule the night before you go to when you go to sleep, because that will set you up for waking up the next morning. Your brain already knows what to do. You already know what you're doing. But then in the morning, you can listen to a podcast. Depending on your spiritual leanings, you might have quiet time. And these are all different things that you can do for a morning routine. And there are set success strategies for morning routines. But the other thing I think is that people need to figure out what works for them, test out the different success strategies, figure out what works for them, and select those 4 or 5 things. And if you have a list of 10 things you do in the morning, that's probably too many. It's got to be 3, 4, 5 things that you do in the morning to set yourself up for success. One thing I do find is that if I accomplish something quick in the morning, then that is a win for me. And it's very easy to do that, right? You can nowadays with technology, I might be horizontal on the bed, but I've prepared an email and then I send it out the next morning, which is usually can do with timing, but there's other things that you can do very quickly. Let's move on to the next one. So the point of this checklist is for people to reflect on their routines, reflect on getting more sleep, reflect on their morning routines, and take the December window to start to look at ways they can set their morning routines, as opposed to waiting till January to set their morning routines.
I think with regard to morning routines, I think not snoozing is really important. So I think that having your mobile away from your bed, so you literally have to get out of bed to turn it off, is really important. So make sure you don't start the day failing. So I think if you press snooze on your phone or an alarm clock, you're literally failing at something you set the day before. It may be something very small, but I think that just committing to a time to wake up and getting up at that time is extremely important. One thing I do is I set my watch alarm 1 minute before my main alarm, which means I have to get out of bed and turn off the main alarm before it wakes up the rest of my family. And that's a good incentive to make sure I don't laze around in bed too long. But I think absolutely early wins really powerful.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. The other app that I use is called Aura. It's not part of the Aura Ring. What it does is it tracks the 14-day sleep debt cycle. And every morning when I get up, I go through and I review if it's accurately tracked my sleep in the middle of the night and might make a couple of adjustments, because noise like the dogs barking will affect it and things like that. But what it does do is it will tell you your energy throughout the day. It'll, based on your sleep debt, it'll predict your energy cycle throughout the day. It'll predict your afternoon energy dip, and which will happen to me at around 3 p.m. So then you can do things to compensate for that. And it'll usually people have an energy surge in the evening. So if they have a project that they really need to focus on, there'll be a window that's ideal to focus on that. And then it'll predict your melatonin window when your body naturally produces melatonin to go to sleep in the evening. And that's been a very helpful thing. So people can get apps like this and play around with these apps as they're going through the holiday period, before walking into January. Now, Rowena says here that one of us is speaking with a bit of an echo. I think that might be you, David, because you picked one up. Yeah. Well, we'll keep going here. Pardon me?
I can hear an echo when I speak. Can you hear it?
Okay. No, I can't hear an echo. You're a little bit modulated, but I can't hear an echo.
Okay. I'll change my microphones next time. Thanks, Sharina, and good to see you here.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback, Rowena. It's good to know that. We'll try to sort that out for the next time. The other thing for people to do is create a stop doing list. So take the reflection time of the holidays to be looking at what you can stop doing, what you can eliminate. And where this comes from is that a lot of people go into 2026 creating a list of more things that they can do. And again, the technology is working in such a way that does it really make sense to have a list of more things that you can do? Actually, what makes sense is to use technology to be learning how you can free up your time to have more reflection time, more creative time, more communication time, things that you can do to increase the low areas of your wheel of life or lean into the positive areas in your wheel of life. And one of the ways you can do that is come up with a list of stop doing. And if Joanne was here, the first real experience I had with the stop doing list was when Joanne and I were working at Juniper. And we got a new head of HR in the company. And one of the things that we had identified is that was doing a lot of things for other departments, particularly around generating reports. So this was before we had leveraged a lot of automation that was available in PeopleSoft. So this would have been, 20 years ago. So there was automation available, but it hadn't been leveraged to its maximum. And the automation that was available in systems like PeopleSoft, Oracle, Workday, SAP at the time is nothing compared to the automation that's available now. So now you can really build powerful dashboards, but less so back then. So we came up with an exercise of things that we're going to stop doing. And I remember in the APAC region, we came up with a list of 40 reports that we were doing on a monthly basis for different stakeholders across the region. And we reduced that list of reports down to 4 or 5. And the reason it was 4 or 5, because some of that information had data privacy implications, and we couldn't. So for some of those stakeholders, we could, like for finance, we could just run a report and say, okay, here's one report that covers the 7 reports you've requested. So we're not going to run all those reports for you, just one report. But we couldn't do that for all the stakeholders. We did have to remove some private information for other stakeholders. But even going from 40 plus down to 4 or 5 reports, 7 reports was a massive win for us and freed up a huge amount of time. So it's the same thing for people to be looking at what can they stop doing in their life. Another way to look at that. Yeah, go ahead, Damien.
I was coaching someone about their to not do list. And they realised one of their biggest stresses was having too many back-to-back meetings. And as often happens in my coaching, I realised that I learn a lot from people I coach. And realised I do that quite a lot myself. So something I've built into my calendar, who could put meetings into my calendar, is it now puts a buffer in between meetings. And so small things like that can make a significant difference, can't they?
Absolutely. And neuroscience would support that. Neuroscience would say that if you don't have that buffer between meetings, you're putting more cognitive load on your brain. And the brain is switching tasks, and it's like your brain's like a bathtub. And when you have one meeting, the bathtub fills up. And if you don't give the brain a chance to drain between meetings, you end up going into another meeting, switching tasks with a full bathtub.
Mm.
Yeah. Plus, also from a pragmatic perspective, you may have action items from that meeting, and it's a lot easier just to take 15 minutes and quickly, if someone said, hey, send me that graphic from that LinkedIn Live, put it up in the comments or something like that, you can easily do that during that time, during that kind of, I guess we call it decompression time.
Yes. It's really good to put that in, isn't it?
So doing a list of items to do would be representative to a degree of clutter, and then that takes us into actual clutter. And that's another thing that people can do during the month of December is really, a lot of people will set goals. Okay, next year, 2026, that's going to be the year I declutter. Why don't you try decluttering, starting that decluttering process now while you're in December and you have a little bit of free time and maybe less emails when you have that downtime so that you then go into 2026 with a sense of freedom, which is what a lot of people gain out of the decluttering process. A lot of people gain a sense of freedom from going through a decluttering process. So these are just some things that people can do to declutter. And um, I guess probably the biggest uh, way forward would be to start small. So start with small areas and declutter that particular area. Start with a drawer and declutter that particular drawer. And and from that point you can then move on to another area and declutter that. But the other thing that's great is if you can visually declutter areas, that often for the brain is a way of freeing people up. Now you have lots of kids, so you may have a lot of clutter.
Yes, absolutely. I like the idea of decluttering, but it's not always easy.
It
But
does take time.
we spend 10 minutes at the end of each day looking what we can declutter as a family, and that usually works quite well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Charles,
And
tell me more about the 12 rule.
okay, so the 12-12-12 rule is a simple method for decluttering that involves finding 12 items to throw away, 12 items to donate, and 12 items to put back in their proper place. And that is tailored can be tailored to individual circumstances. So lately, a big trend has been thrifting. And people who are big thrifters, and this is not just for thrifters, it could be for anybody, and I have a bit of a rule of like this when it comes to shirts, that if I buy a new shirt, I have to get rid of a shirt. That's the rule that I have, and over time, I might even make over time that practice makes me more ruthless about getting rid of shirts. So it's easy to have a favorite shirt, and you think, oh wow, I wore that shirt to, somebody's wedding or somebody's special event, and I really love that shirt and want to keep that memory. But actually, in reality, it doesn't really serve you. And another rule is if you haven't touched something for a certain number of time, some people will say 1 year, some people will say definitely 2 years, is to get rid of it. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
I
And
do,
the
I do
other one,
something similar.
yeah, okay. And the other one is the 2020 rule, which is a decluttering method that helps you decide whether to keep an item you're holding on to just in case. So just in case is a common reason why people hold on to things. And one of the 2020 rule would say that if you can replace that item for less than $20, and it would take you less than 20 minutes to buy it, then let it go. And you can adjust that to your individual circumstances. It might be a little bit more or a little bit less depending on where you live, but it can be a very powerful rule. Yeah. And then the next one that we have here is a brain dump. So, we have a lot of information going on here about um, things to do and the end of the year and goals that you need to process. And are you complete about the goals you accomplished? Are you celebrating the goals you accomplished? Are you forgiving yourself for the goals you didn't accomplish? And that can create a lot of ideas and it can create a lot of insights. It can also create a lot of stress. And a really powerful exercise is to do a brain dump, where you take a piece of paper and you write down everything that you have to do, everything that's burdening you, everything that's bothering you. Lately, if people are on Instagram, there's a couple of Instagram reels that are floating around, which are very, very, they're short, they're 30 seconds long, but they're old videos of Brian Tracy, and he takes a couple of slices at it, Damien, where he is talking about the different ways that people can solve problems, and it's all about writing things down.
Yes,
That's what he's saying. If you just write things down, you're gonna be better off. Get it out of your head, get it onto a piece of paper, and basically what he's talking about is doing a brain dump. Get everything out of your head and write it down, and then sort those ideas, and you'll find out just the process of writing them down is helpful.
it is. Personally, I find literally writing down into a notebook is helpful rather than typing it somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have like a master notebook where you would write things down?
I do. I've got it here.
Okay, a little bit bigger than mine.
I
I
love
do.
technology,
You love technology.
but having a physical notebook, I can physically write it. There's something quite cathartic about it.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. It's very cathartic to write stuff down. Yeah, I do the same thing. So a brain dump is a very powerful exercise, and during the holidays, people may find that they have some extra time. The other thing for people to do is to be disciplined about that extra time. They could, if they're meeting a friend for a coffee for an annual Christmas catch up, go to the coffee shop 1 hour early, or stay at the coffee shop 1 hour later, and sit down and take that extra reflection time to do a brain dump and to write everything down that you have that you want to accomplish or that's burdening you, or it could be anything in your mind. Just write it down. And it doesn't have to be a list. It could be a list if a list works for you, but mind mapping also works well too. That's a powerful way to approach it. Yeah. So in
Absolutely.
addition to brain dump, that's actually what another item is information overload. And I want to go to the information overload slide here, which I think we accidentally skipped over. And another thing to
You
do
did.
during the holidays is to actually, and this is helpful to do all the time, is to be conscious of information overload. And with everything that's happening on the planet right now, it'd be very, very easy to be constantly watching the news, constantly trying to figure out, how what's going on, what's happening, what's the reason for the fire in the Taipo, what's the latest, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in the United States politically, what's happening in Venezuela, et cetera, et cetera. And I find, and this was really an issue during the pandemic, that I just had to switch off at some point and limit how much information I was absorbing because it was counterproductive for mental well-being. And eventually it can lead to burnout if you're not careful. What's your experience of this, Damien?
Well, it's interesting. When I've been looking to get physically healthier, I've been much more careful what I eat. But then when we think about what we consume in terms of media, that also can be quite poisonous and quite unhealthy. And for example, I like politics. I don't support a particular political party, but I'm very interested in politics and what goes on in the world. But I don't generally listen to the news and think that's lovely, and it often leaves me being quite upset or angry. And I think limiting that is actually quite important. And also being careful of sources too. For which medium am I listening to? I don't think there are any news channels which are completely impartial. But I think also being aware of the agenda behind the news channel, or particularly YouTube content creators, for example, is quite useful as well. And taking a step back, I'm thinking that's really bad news, potentially. What can I do about it? And knowing what we can control, what we can't control, can be quite useful sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And what you can control is you can control what you listen to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. You can control what you listen to and how much you absorb, which can make a huge amount of difference for people. The other thing that happens, I do the same thing. I go to different news sources to figure out what are different sources of news reporting or what are different news outlets reporting. I do that quite a bit, especially if it's a really hot topic. And I went to different news outlets because I was, on CNN and BBC, the fires in Taipo were getting a lot of coverage. And then I went to other news outlets and they were not getting any coverage whatsoever. They were getting some, but some of the
Interesting.
stories I actually took down and
Mm.
would just have one main story about it. And I thought that that was very interesting. But I do the same thing. And the other thing I do lately is if I see something really fascinating, for example, the video about Brian Tracy, is I'll go online and I'll research, did Brian Tracy actually say that? And because it could be that it's a deep fake of some sort. And I've found that there are videos, not the Brian Tracy one, I think the Brian Tracy one's accurate, but there are videos and reels that are out there that are just not true. They're made up stories, and they might be loosely based on reality, but in some cases they're just absolutely not true, and are actually part of conspiracy theorists. So as you wrap up here, let me just check. Oh, that's my question here. Yeah, ask us your questions in the comments. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them in the remaining minutes. And we hope that this has given you some ideas on things that you can do in the month of December to get ready for the 2026 and set goals for 2026. That's the idea behind today is to get people ready for 2026 and set up for a successful 2026. So just to review here our ideas, and we'll watch for the a couple questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. So common mistakes people make, they're hyper focused on closing the quarter, or they coast to the end of the year, or they wait till January 1st to start something fresh. Don't wait, start now, start today. Or you might be celebrating successes. So if you have had a good year and you've knocked your goals out of the park or you've accomplished your goals, definitely give yourself a pat on the back. Congratulations. Look at the Wheel of Life as a great tool to look for balance in your life and not necessarily focus on the really low areas. You could commingle the high areas and the low areas to pull up the low areas and amplify the high areas. Forgive yourself. Look at ways to get more sleep. Look at ways to establish a morning routine and start practicing that in December for the new year. Look at things you can stop doing. Take the time to declutter. Do a brain dump of things that are bothering you or all the goals you want to accomplish going forward. And also be conscious of the amount of information that you're consuming. Anything you want to add to that, Damien?
I think that covered it absolutely. And I
Outstanding.
think it's a combination of reflecting on and being grateful for what you've achieved, balanced with what habits we're going to put into place starting now to have the best 2026 we can have.
That's a great way to end, to have the best 2026 that people can have. So hopefully people have
Absolutely.
enjoyed these ideas, and that's it. This is HorizonX in Hong Kong, over and out.